Welcome to Afterwards. I'm Toby Harnden of the Sunday Times of London, and with me today is Charles Moore, the journalist and author, former editor of The Spectator in Britain, the Sunday Times, and the Sunday Telegraph and the Daily Telegraph. Charles is also the man responsible for first sending me to Washington in 1999, and also to Belfast and Jerusalem as well. Charles has written the authorized biography of Margaret Thatcher. It's the first of 2 volumes, and it takes her from her birth to possibly her finest moments, victory in the Falklands War in 1982. The book's already received rave reviews. The Sunday Times hailed its elegant prose, dry wit, prodigious research and careful judgment, and the Telegraph described its combination of biography and intellectual history as likely to become the definitive account of Margaret Thatcher's life amongst many. So congratulations, Charles. I can
Thank you, Toby.
thoroughly endorse those comments. It's hard to believe, but Margaret Thatcher died only last month. The book's, I think, 859 pages, a substantial tome, as it should be. Clearly, it wasn't written overnight. It wasn't written after her. Tell me about the genesis of the book, how it came about and when.
Well, Margaret Thatcher was advised that she ought to do something about her papers, all the papers that a Prime Minister takes out when they leave office. And she's an Oxford graduate. Oxford University refused her an honorary degree in a famous insult. So she decided to give them to Cambridge, Churchill College. And when she did that, she was also advised that somebody's going to write your life, Lady Thatcher, was the way people put it to her. Why don't you pick someone who you get on with and let them get going, give them the access and the chance to look at the papers. And she very kindly chose me. This was right back in 1997. And obviously, it's an intimidating prospect, but also a great honour and a fascinating opportunity. So I said yes. And in a sense, I've been working on it ever since, though the great bulk of the research took place from 2004. But the key point is that it's the complete access which hasn't happened to anybody else, and so she sort of turned the key in the lock for me.
Right, but although it's authorised, I mean, Mrs. Thatcher, you call her Mrs. Thatcher throughout the book, and so we'll do.
Well, I call her Margaret until she became Mrs. Thatcher. Yeah.
So when she becomes
Yes.
Lady Thatcher, you'll give her the title, right? I remember there's Mrs. Thatcher, so I'll probably stick with that. She was. Although authorised, she was somebody who didn't like to talk about personal matters. She didn't sort of want to dwell on her own inner life, and she was also somebody who was sort of very tidy and got rid of things. And so, in a sense, I mean, there must have been some difficulties in tackling the subject, even though it was authorised.
Yes, I mean, in seen from a historian's point of view, in documentary terms, she's a potential historian's nightmare because she did want to throw everything away. Luckily, of course, once you're Prime Minister, you can't throw things away because somebody will keep it. The officials will keep it. The big problem would be early in her life. How could you crack this? Because she destroyed everything. And not, I think, because she wished to conceal secrets particularly, but because she's a sort of tidy-minded housewife. You move house, you throw out all the paper. Messy old paper lying around, that would be her attitude. Right. And again, it was the way she gave me access which was the key, because I don't think she knew what was there, actually. And it was talking to her sister, Muriel. She had no brothers and one sister. Muriel, 4 years older than Margaret. And Muriel told me a lot about their childhood, which had not previously been known. And even more interestingly, had a vast collection of letters from Margaret to Muriel, starting in 1939, when Margaret was 13, 14, and going on until about 1964. So you get a complete picture in Margaret's own words to her sister of her education, her teens, her love of films, her love of clothes. There's more about clothes than politics in all of this. Oxford, getting in there, what it was like there, starting to do politics there, starting to look at the world of work in industry, becoming a parliamentary candidate, and of course love and falling in love and boyfriends.
She had a number of boyfriends, which I think some people were perhaps surprised by, not something she ever talked about.
She did. The only way in which she talked about it was to deny it, which I don't blame her for. You don't have to tell the truth about things like that. But she said she'd had no boyfriends before Dennis, and there were at least 3 serious boyfriends, and which all appear in the letters in a very amusing way sometimes, in a very interesting and revealing way. And what you can see through that is her sort of making the choice of her life. I mean, what am I going to do? What sort of a person am I going to be? And therefore, whom will I marry? And
it was a fascinating description of a farmer who later became Muriel's husband, I understand, in those letters. Yes.
Well, this is... may I read you a tiny bit of what she says, because it is very funny. What had happened was she was living in Colchester in Essex, and this guy met her at a Conservative function. She was an active young Conservative, and he took her out and to dinner. He kept pestering her. And so this is what she says to Muriel. Eventually I said yes, and we dined at the George. He's about 35 and has a kind of naivety that only Scotsmen can have. I'd expected to be bored to tears, but in fact he was really rather sweet, with quite a sense of humour. He practically presented his credentials to me. His farm is worth £25,000. He has £3,001 shares of ICI, now standing at 47 shillings, 1,000 of something else, 500 of this and that, and so on and so forth. And being a Scotsman, he left a 9-penny tip for the waiter. I should say for an American audience that the Scots are legendary for being quite tight with their money. He left a 9-penny tip for the waiter, she says. I could have fallen through the floor. That's how people with money keep it. And then she says, he drove me home in his present rather old car and got quite ardent on the way. I said I couldn't possibly fix another definite date, so he's going to phone me. The funniest part is that although I have been introduced to him, I can never catch his name and still don't know it. His people are farmers, she says, and he speaks with a frightfully Scotch accent. I'm afraid he's going to be an awful nuisance.
Yeah.
And he was quite serious about her. She wasn't very serious about him. But there's a brilliant moment when he gives her a handbag, and so of course she loves handbags, so she has to stay with him. She says in a letter, I better stay with him for a bit. But what happened was that she sort of passed him on to her sister. And so Willie, this farmer, married Muriel.
And
extraordinary.
There were inklings even at this time of Margaret Thatcher not wanting to be, seeing a possible life as a sort of farmer's wife or a housewife, and of her not wanting to go that route.
That's right. She had a sort of premonition. She went to dinner there, and there was an incident, as used to happen in those days. The men stayed at the table after dinner, the women left, and Margaret stayed with the men to talk about politics and things like that. And she was very struck by how the men didn't want to go through to the women and thought the women's conversation was boring. And you can see her getting in her letter a sort of premonition that she doesn't want this sort of life where she's the housewife stuck in the farm being looked down on by the men. And she doesn't say it in precisely those words, but that's clearly the way she's thinking. And she realised it wasn't for her, this type of life. And of course it was suitable for Muriel, and so she arranged it.
Yeah.
And then she had one other, one really quite serious love of a much older doctor. But then the age difference was so big, he was twice her age, that she didn't marry him. And all sort of on the rebound, along comes Dennis, who at first she says in a letter, he's not a frightfully attractive creature, I think this is a phrase she used.
Yeah.
But he proposed to her, and she didn't immediately accept him. Dennis said to me, she didn't leap at it, was the way he put it.
Yeah.
And but then she accepted him, and as history knows, it worked very well.
Yeah. And how much time did you spend with her personally during the research?
Well, luckily, as I said to you, I got offered this in 1997, and luckily I did talk to her a lot in the 1990s. I say luckily because, as is now well known, her mental capacities declined in the 21st century, and it wasn't possible then to conduct formal interviews anymore. It was sort of intimidating for her and confusing. Would have been unfair to her to do that. And so later on, what we could do is have lunch and chat, and I'd get little bits of information, and that was valuable. But luckily, I did do formal, more concentrated interviews in the 1990s.
And when was the last time you saw her? Did you continue to see her?
I didn't see her after her final illness, which was, she had an operation in December. And after that, she never went home. She went and lived in the Ritz Hotel, sort of being looked after. Yeah. And I didn't see her then. When I last saw her, she was perfectly cheerful and in reasonable health. But, she did have, it was obviously sad because she just could remember so little. But a sort of quality of hers, which was always there that the public didn't know about, did come out in her old age, which was a sort of sweetness of character. She liked domestic life. she was always feeding too much food to her cats, that sort of thing. And that side of it was very apparent in old age.